You've spent your entire adult life being responsible. You showed up for work even when you were exhausted. You paid the bills even when money was tight. You took care of your kids, your aging parents, your partner, your colleagues. You did what needed to be done every single day, whether you felt like it or not. And somewhere along the way, you became the person everyone relies on, the one who holds everything together, the one who never complains, never fails, never asks for help, and you're proud of that. Or at least you were. Because now, decades into being the responsible one, something has shifted. The weight of all that responsibility doesn't feel manageable anymore. It feels crushing. You wake up tired. You go to bed exhausted. You move through your days completing tasks, but feeling nothing. And the worst part, nobody sees it. Because you've become so good at being responsible that everyone assumes you're fine. They don't notice that you're drowning. They don't see that the person holding everything together is falling apart. This is the responsibility crisis of mature adults, the hidden struggle of people who've spent so long taking care of everyone else that they've forgotten how to take care of themselves. And if you don't address it, it will consume what's left of you. Here's the paradox. The very trait that made you successful, your sense of responsibility, is now destroying you. Being responsible got you where you are. It earned you respect at work, stability in your relationships, trust from your family. People know they can count on you. And that reliability has been your identity. It's who you are. The responsible one, the dependable one. The person who gets things done. But what worked in your 30s and 40s doesn't work in your 50s and 60s. Because responsibility, when taken too far, becomes a prison. You're so busy fulfilling obligations that you've stopped living. You've become a function, a role. Not a person with needs and desires and limits, but a machine that produces outcomes for other people. The trap is that you can't just stop being responsible. Bills still need to be paid. Work still needs to be done. People still depend on you. And walking away from those obligations feels impossible. It feels selfish, irresponsible, like betraying everything you've built your life around. So you keep going. You keep showing up. You keep carrying the weight. But the weight keeps getting heavier because the responsibilities don't decrease as you age. They multiply. Your kids might be grown, but now they need help with their own kids. Your parents are aging and need care. Your career demands haven't lessened. If anything, they've intensified because you're in a senior role with more pressure. Your partner expects you to be present and engaged. Your friends expect you to show up. And you're trying to meet all these expectations while your body is aging, your energy is declining, and your capacity to handle stress is diminishing. What makes this a crisis is that you can't admit you're struggling. Because admitting struggle feels like admitting failure. You've built your entire identity on being the person who handles things, who doesn't break, who doesn't complain. And if you suddenly say, I can't do this anymore, what does that mean? That you are never as strong as everyone thought? That you've been lying to yourself and everyone else? That all those years of being responsible were just a performance you can no longer maintain? The shame of that admission keeps you silent. So you suffer alone. You smile and say you're fine while internally you're collapsing. And nobody knows because you've trained them not to ask. You've trained them to believe that you don't need help. The paradox deepens when you realize that your hyper responsibility has created dependency in the people around you. Your family has learned that you'll handle everything, so they've stopped taking responsibility themselves. Your colleagues have learned that you'll pick up the slack so they don't push as hard. Your partner has learned that you'll manage the household, so they've stopped noticing what needs to be done, and now you're trapped. Because if you stop doing everything, things will fall apart. Not because other people can't handle it, but because they've never had to. You've trained them to be dependent on you. And undoing that dependency requires setting boundaries, saying no, letting things fail, all of which feels irresponsible. So you stay stuck, doing everything, resenting everyone, burning out slowly while maintaining the appearance of competence. Another layer of the paradox is that your sense of responsibility is often rooted in fear, not virtue. You're not being responsible because it's noble. You're being responsible because you're afraid of what happens if you're not. Afraid people will be disappointed in you. Afraid they'll stop loving you. Afraid you'll lose your job, your relationship, your status. Afraid that if you're not useful, you're not valuable. So you keep proving your worth through endless responsibility, through being indispensable. But indispensability is exhausting and it's unsustainable. Because eventually, you run out. You hit a wall where you simply can't do it anymore. And when that happens, all the fear you've been avoiding crashes down at once. The very thing you were trying to prevent, losing control, disappointing people, being seen as weak, becomes inevitable. Not because you chose it, but because you pushed yourself past your breaking point. The cultural narrative doesn't help. Society glorifies responsibility. It tells you that maturity means sacrificing your needs for others, that being a good parent, a good employee, a good partner means putting everyone else first. And if you're struggling under the weight of that, the advice is always the same. Work harder. Be more organized. Practice better time management. As if the problem is your inefficiency rather than the impossibility of meeting everyone's expectations while neglecting your own. Nobody tells you that it's okay to not be responsible for everything, that some things can wait, that some people need to step up and carry their own weight, that you're allowed to have limits, that saying no isn't selfish, it's survival. And without that permission, you keep pushing, keep sacrificing, keep pretending you're fine until one day you're not. And by then, the damage is done. Addressing the responsibility crisis in mature adulthood begins with distinguishing between healthy responsibility and compulsive over-responsibility. Healthy responsibility means taking care of your genuine obligations, the things that are truly yours to handle. Over-responsibility means taking on obligations that aren't yours, fixing problems you didn't create, managing other people's lives because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. The shift required is learning to recognize the difference. And that's harder than it sounds, because after decades of being over-responsible, it feels normal. It feels like just who you are. But it's not. It's a pattern, and patterns can be changed. The first step is acknowledging that you have limits. This sounds obvious, but for people who've spent decades ignoring their limits, it's revolutionary. You've been operating as if you're infinite, as if you can handle unlimited stress, unlimited demands, unlimited pressure without breaking. But you're not infinite. You're human. You have a finite amount of energy, time, and emotional capacity. And when you exceed those limits consistently, you pay a price. Not immediately, but eventually. The exhaustion accumulates, the stress compounds, and one day you hit a wall. The shift required is accepting your limits before you hit that wall, not as failure, not as weakness, but as reality. You can't do everything, and pretending you can doesn't make you strong. It makes you depleted. Once you accept that you have limits, the next step is identifying what's actually yours to handle and what you've taken on unnecessarily. This requires honest reflection. Look at your list of responsibilities, everything you're currently managing, and ask, is this truly mine? Did I agree to this, or did I just assume it was my job? Will terrible things happen if I stop doing this, or have I just convinced myself they will? Often, you'll find that a significant portion of what you're carrying isn't actually necessary. You're managing things that other people could handle. You're solving problems that don't need solving. You're maintaining standards that only you care about. And letting go of those unnecessary responsibilities isn't being irresponsible. It's being honest about what's sustainable. One of the hardest parts of this shift is learning to say no. Not occasionally, not in extreme circumstances, but regularly, as a normal part of how you operate. For people who've spent their lives saying yes, this feels impossible. Saying no feels selfish, mean, like you're letting people down. But here's the truth. Saying yes when you don't have the capacity is worse than saying no. Because when you say yes out of obligation or guilt, you're not fully present. You're resentful, you're exhausted, and the quality of what you provide suffers. Saying no, on the other hand, creates space for you to say yes to the things that actually matter, to show up fully for the responsibilities that are genuinely yours. And that's better for everyone. Better for you because you're not drowning. Better for them because when you do say yes, you mean it. Learning to say no requires practice, and it helps to start small. Not with the biggest, scariest requests, but with minor things. Someone asks you to join a committee. You say no. A colleague asks you to cover their shift. You decline. Your adult child asks you to babysit on a day when you're exhausted. You say you're not available. These small no's are practice. They teach you that saying no doesn't destroy relationships, that people can handle disappointment, that the world doesn't fall apart when you set a boundary. And gradually, you build the capacity to say no to bigger things, to step back from major responsibilities that are crushing you, to renegotiate the terms of your life so they're sustainable instead of overwhelming. Another critical shift is learning to let other people experience the consequences of their choices. This is especially hard for parents, but it applies to all relationships. You've probably spent years protecting people from consequences, bailing them out, solving their problems, managing their emotions, and in doing so, you've prevented them from developing their own capacity for responsibility. They've learned that they don't have to handle things because you will. And that dependency isn't helping them. It's keeping them stuck. The shift required is stepping back, letting them struggle, letting them fail, not because you don't care, but because caring sometimes means allowing people to learn through difficulty. And yes, it's painful to watch, but it's necessary for them to grow and for you to stop carrying weight that was never yours to carry. This shift also requires addressing the fear that's driving your over-responsibility. Why are you so afraid of not being responsible? What do you think will happen if you let people down? Often, the fear is rooted in early experiences. Maybe you grew up in a chaotic household where you had to be the responsible one to survive. Maybe you learned that love is conditional, that people only value you when you're useful. Maybe you've internalized the belief that your worth is tied to your productivity. Whatever the origin, the fear is real. And it won't disappear just because you intellectually understand it. You have to address it at a deeper level. Through therapy, through journaling, through conversations with people you trust. You have to unlearn the belief that your value depends on how much you do for others, and replace it with the understanding that you're valuable simply because you exist. Not because of what you produce or provide, but because you're a human being worthy of care and rest. Part of this work also involves grieving. Grieving the version of yourself who could handle everything. Grieving the identity of being the indispensable one. Grieving the relationships that were built on you being over-responsible and may not survive you setting boundaries. This grief is real and necessary because you're not just changing your behavior. You're changing who you are, and that loss, even when it's a loss of something unsustainable, hurts. Allow yourself to feel that. To sit with the sadness of realizing that the way you've been living can't continue. And then from that grief, something new can emerge. A version of you that's responsible without being over-responsible. That takes care of others without abandoning yourself. That sets boundaries without guilt. One practical tool for managing the responsibility crisis is the concept of good enough. Not perfect, not exceptional, just good enough. This is radical for people who've spent their lives striving for excellence in everything. But excellence in everything is impossible, and the pursuit of it is what's killing you. So you have to lower the bar, not for the things that truly matter, but for the things that don't. Your house doesn't have to be spotless. Your emails don't have to be flawless. Your meals don't have to be elaborate. Good enough is actually good enough, and accepting that frees up enormous amounts of energy. Energy you can redirect toward things that actually nourish you instead of just maintaining appearances. Another essential practice is building in rest before you're depleted. Most over-responsible people only rest when they're forced to, when they're sick, when they've completely burned out, when their body literally won't let them continue. But rest isn't something you earn through exhaustion. It's something you need regularly to function. And if you don't build it in proactively, your body will force it on you reactively. So you have to schedule rest the same way you schedule responsibilities, not as a reward, not as something you do when everything else is done, but as a non-negotiable part of how you operate. And that might mean disappointing people, letting some things go undone, saying no to requests you would have previously said yes to. But it's necessary because sustainable responsibility requires rest, and rest requires boundaries. It's also important to recognize that your over-responsibility is sometimes a form of control. You do everything because you don't trust anyone else to do it right. You believe that if you're not managing things, they'll fall apart, and that belief keeps you stuck in the pattern. The shift required is letting go of control, trusting that other people are capable, accepting that they might do things differently than you would, and that's okay. That different doesn't mean wrong. This is terrifying for people who've spent their lives being the one who holds everything together, but it's also liberating Because once you let go of control, you're no longer solely responsible for outcomes. Other people can step up, and you can step back without everything collapsing. Addressing the responsibility crisis also means renegotiating your relationships. The people in your life have gotten used to you being over-responsible. And when you start setting boundaries, they'll push back. They'll tell you you're being selfish, that you're not the person they thought you were, that they need you, and that pushback will tempt you to go back to the old pattern. But you can't, because the old pattern is unsustainable. So you have to hold the boundary. You have to communicate clearly. I can't do this anymore. I need you to step up. I need support instead of more demands. And some people will adjust. They'll respect your boundaries and find their own capacity for responsibility. But some won't. Some relationships are built entirely on you being over-responsible. And those relationships may end. And that's painful, but it's also necessary. Because you can't sacrifice yourself to maintain relationships that only work when you're depleted. One of the most profound shifts in addressing this crisis is learning to prioritize your own well-being without guilt. For people who've spent their lives putting everyone else first, this feels impossible, selfish, wrong, but it's not. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary, because you can't take care of anyone else if you're completely depleted. The airplane oxygen mask metaphor is true. You have to put yours on first, not because you matter more than others, but because you can't help anyone if you're not okay. And being okay requires prioritizing your needs, getting enough sleep, eating well, moving your body, having time alone, engaging in activities that nourish you instead of drain you. These aren't luxuries. They're requirements for sustainable living. And if you don't prioritize them, you will burn out. Not eventually, soon. Another critical practice is asking for help. This is often the hardest part for over-responsible people. You're so used to being the helper that being the one who needs help feels humiliating, weak, like admitting failure. But asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's recognizing that you can't do everything alone, that you need support, and that other people are capable of providing it. So you have to practice asking. Start small. Ask someone to help with a minor task. Ask a friend to listen while you vent. Ask your partner to take on something you've been handling alone. And notice what happens. Often, people are willing to help. They just didn't realize you needed it because you've been so good at appearing capable. And when you ask, they step up. And that support, that shared responsibility, is what makes life sustainable. It's also essential to recognize that the responsibility crisis is exacerbated by societal expectations around aging. Society tells you that you should have it all figured out by now, that you should be in your prime earning years, at the peak of your career, with your personal life settled. But those expectations are unrealistic. Life doesn't work that way, and the pressure to maintain that appearance, to keep being successful, productive, in control, is what's crushing you. The shift required is rejecting those expectations, acknowledging that it's okay to not have it all together, that it's okay to scale back, to simplify, to let go of the performance of competence and just be human, messy, imperfect, limited human. And that's not failure, that's reality. Finally, addressing the responsibility crisis requires you to reconnect with what you actually want, not what you're supposed to want, not what other people need from you, but what you genuinely desire. This is difficult because you've probably spent so long focused on obligations that you've lost touch with your own wants. You might not even know what they are anymore, so you have to start paying attention. What makes you feel alive? What brings you joy? What would you do if you had no obligations? These aren't frivolous questions. They're essential because life isn't just about fulfilling responsibilities. It's about living. And if all you're doing is fulfilling responsibilities, you're not living. You're just surviving. And you deserve more than survival. When you start addressing the responsibility crisis, instead of just enduring it, the first thing you notice is that you can breathe again. The constant pressure in your chest eases. The tension you've been carrying for years starts to release. You're not doing less necessarily, but you're doing what's actually yours to do instead of carrying weight that belongs to other people. And that distinction between healthy responsibility and compulsive over-responsibility creates space. Space to rest, space to think, space to feel something other than exhaustion. Your relationships shift. Some deepen because you're no longer resentful. You're showing up voluntarily, not out of obligation. You're present because you want to be, not because you have to be. And people can feel the difference. They experience you as more authentic, more engaged, more real. Other relationships end or change dramatically. The ones that were built entirely on your over-functioning don't survive you setting boundaries. And that's painful, but it's also clarifying. You discover who actually cares about you versus who just valued what you provided. And the relationships that remain become healthier because they're based on mutual respect instead of one-sided caretaking. You also rediscover parts of yourself you'd forgotten existed. The part that has interest beyond managing everyone else's needs. The part that laughs easily. The part that has energy for things beyond obligations. You start doing things simply because you want to, not because they're productive or necessary. You read for pleasure. You take walks that go nowhere. You spend time with people you actually enjoy instead of people you're obligated to see. And those moments, those small acts of choosing yourself, rebuild your sense of being a person instead of just a function. Over time, you realize that the people you were over-functioning for are actually capable of handling their own lives. They step up when you step back. They develop their own competence. And while there's some grief in realizing you weren't as indispensable as you thought, there's also relief. You're free. Free to live. Free to rest. Free to prioritize your own well-being without guilt. You don't have to keep carrying everything. The belief that you're responsible for everyone and everything is a lie you've been telling yourself for so long that it feels like truth. But it's not. You're not responsible for other people's choices, their emotions, their failures, or their growth. You're responsible for yourself, for your own well-being, for living in a way that's sustainable instead of slowly killing you. And if that feels selfish, if stepping back from over-responsibility feels like betrayal, that's just proof of how deeply the pattern runs. Because taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And you can't keep sacrificing yourself to maintain relationships and systems that only work when you're depleted. The responsibility crisis doesn't resolve itself. It doesn't get better with time. It gets worse. The weight gets heavier. The exhaustion deepens. The resentment builds. Until one day you break. And by then, the damage to your health, your relationships, your sense of self is severe. So you have to address it now, not when things calm down, not when other people are more capable. Now, while you still have the energy to make changes, while you still have a self left to protect. Start small. Say no to one thing this week. Let one responsibility go undone. Ask for help with one task. These aren't grand gestures, but they're practice. Practice setting boundaries. Practice prioritizing yourself. Practice trusting that the world won't collapse if you're not holding it together. And gradually, those small acts of self-preservation accumulate. You build the capacity to live differently, to be responsible without being over-responsible, to care for others without abandoning yourself. And that balance, that sustainable way of being, is what allows you to live fully instead of just surviving. You've spent decades being the person everyone relies on. It's time to become someone you can rely on too.